Hi, it's Writing Wednesday, and you may remember that a couple of videos ago I sat in this very same spot in front of the world's most beautiful built-in bookshelves and talked about how I have trouble seeing my characters and seeing the world of my book, and how everyone looks a little bit like this to me because that's a problem I have in real life. The flip side of what you see as a writer is, of course, what you hear as a writer, and just as I'm very bad at the visual aspect of things, I like to pride myself, and I tend to be told by other people that I'm pretty good at the auditory side of things, which makes sense because I'm much more of an auditory than a visual learner. I may remember everything you said word for word if we have coffee, but I'm not going to remember what you were wearing, and if it's the first time we've met, I may not recognize you if we meet in the mall next week by accident. Sorry about that, nothing personal, but I will remember almost all the words you said because my memory is very keenly tuned to pick up words and language. And that's why people sometimes tell me I think that I'm good at writing dialogue, and it comes very easily to me, to the extent that sometimes I'll write a scene and I'll realize all I've got are pages and pages of dialogue, and I've often had to stop in the middle of writing and ask myself, do people do anything other than sit around and talk to each other? Because my characters don't seem to ever do anything but that. Interesting side note, you'd think as a result of this that I'd be able to write plays and like movie scripts and stuff, which would be awfully nice if I could, but I can't. I've tried it numerous times, tried to write plays, and I simply cannot, even though I can hear the dialogue. And I think it's actually that visual problem, because in order to write a play, you have to be able to visualize what the characters are doing and where they're moving around on the stage, and I can't do that. I suppose I could write radio plays, but there doesn't seem to be a big market for those anymore. In writing novels, I use a lot of dialogue, and a lot of people struggle with dialogue, and one of the things that's funny about writing is that something that you do well and something that comes naturally to you may actually be the hardest thing to teach someone else. So people ask me, how do you write good dialogue? And I've actually taught a workshop on writing dialogue, and can do it again if anybody would like to ask and, pay me a little bit. But I think the key thing with writing good dialogue is to develop your ear, to listen, to start listening to how people talk. Now, of course, a lot of what people say when they talk is useless for dialogue. People throw in a lot of meaningless small talk, they trail off in the middle of sentences, they put in ums and ahs, but when you clean all that stuff up and get at the essence of what people are saying, it's hard to do better than the way real people talk. I once sat at a Tim Hortons, I think possibly with my cousin Jennifer, I'm not sure, but whatever we were talking about, it was totally obscured in my mind by the conversation of the two women at the next table, one of whom had presumably recently had her marriage break up, because she was saying to the other, my dear, I should have seen it coming, he'd be out on the road, 5 days on the road, and he'd come back in and nothing more than a peck on the cheek, and that's not natural, is it? She remember Marge Crocker, when Marge's Bill used to be out on the rigs, he'd come and he'd barely be through the door after coming in off the rigs, and he'd have her down on the floor. I mean, it's only natural, man's away for a week, he wants a bit of tail, right? But Tina says, Mom, you got to get on with your life, and that's what I'm doing. I was riveted by that, and I'm always riveted by overheard conversations in public places, because I just think the way people talk, the way people express themselves is fascinating. By the way, that entire conversation about Marge and Bill and coming in off the road, I didn't just remember that from a conversation 20 years ago. I remembered it because I wrote it down and used it in a story. And in the story, it's an incidental detail. It's not the main character talking. In fact, the main character is doing exactly what I was doing, sitting in Tim Hortons talking to someone else and overhearing this conversation. But because she's going through her own painful breakup as she overhears this, the other woman's overheard snatch of conversation provides an interesting counterpoint to what's going on in my character's head. I don't usually do that. I don't steal real-life conversations right out of people's mouths that often. But I try to get a sense of the rhythm and the cadence of how people talk, and then I try to see if I've captured that in my writing. And one of the best ways is to read your dialogue out loud. I don't do it all that often, probably because I have a really strong auditory sort of way of reading anyway, so when I'm reading silently I hear the voices. I hear the voices in my head talking to me. I really do. I feel like writing is all about taking the voices in my head and getting them out on paper. Cheaper than therapy! Anyway, if you don't hear the voices in your head really clearly, what you might want to do when you've written a scene with dialogue in it is go through and read it out loud to see how it sounds. And it should sound like real people talking, only better.